Marcus Williams drove his old blue car down the quiet streets of Millbrook. The small town looked peaceful in the morning sun. White houses sat behind neat lawns. American flags hung from front porches. It was the kind of place where nothing bad ever seemed to happen. Marcus had been living in Millbrook for 6 months now. He rented a small apartment on Oak Street. Every Tuesday morning, he drove to Betty's diner for coffee and breakfast. It was his routine. In the Army, routines had kept him alive. Now that he was out, routines kept him sane. He parked his car in the gravel lot next to the diner. The car was nothing special. It was 10 years old with a few scratches on the paint. The license plates were from another state. Marcus had moved around a lot in his life. The Army had sent him all over the world. Now he was trying to find a place to call home. Marcus was 45 years old. His hair was turning gray at the sides. His hands were rough from years of hard work. He walked with perfect posture like a soldier, but most people did not notice this. In Millbrook, he was just another quiet man who kept to himself. The bell above the diner door rang as Marcus walked inside. Betty, the owner, smiled at him from behind the counter. She was a kind woman in her 60s with gray hair and a warm face. "Morning, Marcus," she said. "The usual?" "Yes, please," Marcus replied. His voice was calm and deep. "Coffee black." "2. Eggs over easy, wheat toast." Marcus sat at his regular table by the window. He pulled out a paperback book from his jacket pocket. The book was old and worn. He had read it many times before. It was about a man who went to war and came home changed. Marcus knew how that felt. Outside in the parking lot, Officer Danny Mitchell sat in his police car. Danny was 28 years old and had been a cop for 5 years. He had short brown hair and mean eyes. Danny thought he was tough. He thought his badge made him special. But really, Danny was just a bully with a gun. Danny saw Marcus through the diner window. Something about the black man eating alone made Danny angry. Maybe it was the out-of-state license plates. Maybe it was the way Marcus carried himself with quiet confidence. Or maybe Danny was just having a bad day and wanted to take it out on someone. Danny had grown up in Millbrook. He thought he knew everyone who belonged there. Marcus was an outsider. Danny did not like outsiders, especially ones who looked different from him. Danny had been in trouble at work before. Other cops whispered about him. They said he was too rough with people. They said he picked on folks who could not fight back. The police chief had talked to Danny many times. She told him to be more careful. She told him that people were watching, but Danny did not listen. He thought he was untouchable. He thought no one would dare challenge a police officer. Danny watched Marcus through the window. The man was reading his book and drinking coffee. He looked peaceful. This made Danny even more angry. Danny wanted to wipe that calm look off the man's face. He wanted to show him who was in charge in this town. Danny got out of his police car. He looked around to make sure no one was watching. The parking lot was empty except for Marcus's car and a few others. The diner had security cameras, but Danny was not worried about them. Who would believe some outsider over a police officer? Danny walked over to Marcus's car. It was unlocked, which was common in small towns like Millbrook. Danny looked through the windows but did not see anything interesting. Just some books on the back seat and a gym bag in the trunk area. Then Danny had an idea. A mean smile crossed his face. He pulled out his tactical knife from his belt. The knife was sharp and black. Danny had used it many times before, but never like this. He knelt down next to the rear tire of Marcus's car. Danny looked around one more time. No one was watching. He pressed the tip of the knife into the tire wall. The rubber was thick, but the knife was sharp. Danny twisted the blade and pushed hard. Air began to hiss out of the tire. Danny felt excited as he watched the tire slowly go flat. He imagined Marcus coming out to find his car broken. The man would be stuck. He would have to call for help. Maybe he would even have to call the police. Danny thought this was very funny. Danny put his knife away and walked back to his police car. He sat inside and watched the diner. He wanted to see Marcus's face when he found the flat tire. Danny felt powerful. He felt like he had won some kind of game. What Danny did not know was that Marcus Williams was not just any quiet man. Marcus had spent 23 years in the United States Army. For the last 15 years, he had been in Delta Force. Delta Force soldiers were the best of the best. They were sent on the most dangerous missions. They were trained to fight terrorists and rescue hostages. Marcus had been to Iraq and Afghanistan many times. He had led teams deep into enemy territory. Other soldiers called him the Ghost because he could move without being seen. Enemy fighters feared him. Even other American soldiers spoke his name with respect. Marcus had saved lives. He had stopped terrorist attacks. He had medals that most people would never see because his missions were secret. The government had files on Marcus that were locked away in classified vaults. But in Millbrook, he was just another customer at Betty's Diner. Marcus had retired from the Army 6 months ago. He was tired of war. He was tired of violence. He wanted to live a quiet life. He wanted to read books and drink coffee and maybe find some peace. That was why he had come to Millbrook. It seemed like a safe place where nothing bad ever happened. As Marcus sat in the diner, he had no idea that Officer Danny Mitchell was outside ruining his car. Marcus was reading about a character in his book who was trying to start over after the war. Marcus understood that character. Starting over was harder than it looked. Marcus finished his coffee and left money on the table. He said goodbye to Betty and walked toward the door. The bell rang again as he stepped outside. The morning air was cool and fresh. Birds were singing in the trees around the parking lot. Marcus walked toward his car, still thinking about his book. He was almost at the driver's door when he noticed something wrong. The back of his car was sitting lower than it should be. Marcus stopped walking. His soldier instincts kicked in automatically. Marcus walked around to the back of his car. The rear tire was completely flat. But this was not just any flat tire. Marcus knelt down and looked closely. There was a clean cut in the sidewall. The cut was straight and deep. This was not from a nail or a rock. Someone had done this on purpose. Marcus stood up slowly. His face showed no emotion, but inside something cold and dangerous was waking up. Marcus looked around the parking lot. His trained eyes saw everything: the position of the other cars, the angles of the buildings. The police car parked where it had a perfect view of his vehicle. Through the windshield of the police car, Marcus could see Officer Danny Mitchell watching him. Danny had a smile on his face. He was enjoying this. He thought he had played a clever trick on some helpless outsider, but Danny Mitchell had no idea what he had just done. He had no idea who Marcus Williams really was, and he had no idea that his life was about to change forever. Marcus stood beside his car and looked at the flat tire. 23 years of military training had taught him to stay calm in any situation. His face showed no anger. His hands did not shake. But inside his mind, Marcus was already working. He knelt down again and studied the cut in the tire. The blade had gone through the rubber in one clean slice. This was done by someone who knew what they were doing. Someone with a sharp knife and bad intentions. Marcus had seen cuts like this before, but not on car tires. He had seen them on enemy equipment in war zones. Marcus pulled out his cell phone and took pictures of the tire from different angles. He made sure to get close shots of the cut and wide shots that showed his whole car. In the Army, Marcus had learned that evidence was important. You never knew when you might need to prove what really happened. Officer Danny Mitchell was still sitting in his police car watching. Danny expected Marcus to get angry. He expected him to yell or curse or maybe even cry. But Marcus was doing none of those things. This confused Danny. Most people would be upset about a flat tire. They would be angry about being late for work or having to spend money on repairs. But Marcus was not most people. He had been in situations where staying calm meant staying alive. A flat tire was nothing compared to being shot at by terrorists or having to rescue hostages from a burning building. Marcus had faced real problems before. This was just an inconvenience. Marcus opened his trunk and found his spare tire. It was in good condition, which was lucky. He also found his jack and tire iron. Marcus had always believed in being prepared. In the Army, preparation could mean the difference between life and death. In civilian life, it just meant being able to change your own tire. As Marcus worked, he thought about what had happened. Someone had deliberately damaged his car. But why? Marcus had been living in Millbrook for 6 months. He had never caused trouble for anyone. He paid his rent on time. He was polite to his neighbors. He kept to himself. Marcus loosened the lug. Nuts on the flat tire. His movements were quick and efficient. He had changed tires in mud and snow in the middle of the night under enemy fire. Changing a tire in a peaceful parking lot was easy by comparison. Danny Mitchell watched from his police car and started to feel uncomfortable. He had expected Marcus to struggle with the tire change. Most city people did not know how to change their own tires. They called for help or waited for a tow truck. But Marcus was working like a professional mechanic. Danny also noticed something else about Marcus. The man moved like a soldier. His posture was perfect. His movements were controlled and precise. Danny had been in the military himself, but only for 2 years. He had been a desk clerk at a base in Texas. He had never seen real action. But he recognized military bearing when he saw it. For the first time, Danny started to wonder if he had made a mistake. What if this man was not just some random outsider? What if he was someone important? Danny pushed these thoughts away. He was a police officer. He had authority here. What could one man do to him? Marcus removed the flat tire and rolled it to the back of his car. The tire was heavy, but Marcus lifted it easily. His arms and shoulders were still strong from years of military training. Even in retirement, Marcus kept himself in excellent shape. Old habits die hard. Marcus put the spare tire on and tightened the lug nuts. He worked in a specific pattern, tightening opposite nuts to make sure the wheel was balanced. This was something they had taught him in Army vehicle maintenance. Marcus had learned many skills in the military that most people never needed to. No doubt as Marcus worked, other people started to notice what was happening. Betty came out of the diner to throw away some trash. She saw Marcus changing his tire and shook her head sadly. She had heard about problems with some of the local police officers. She had heard they sometimes picked on people who were different. An old man walking his dog stopped to watch. The man had been in the military during the Vietnam War. He could tell that Marcus was a veteran just by the way he moved. The old man wanted to help, but he could see that Marcus did not need any help. Marcus knew what he was doing. Marcus finished installing the spare tire and put his tools back in the trunk. He loaded the flat tire carefully, making sure not to damage anything else in his car. Marcus treated his possessions with respect. He had learned not to waste anything. In some of the places he had been, supplies were hard to come by. Before getting in his car, Marcus walked around the vehicle one more time. He checked the other tires to make sure they had not been damaged too. He looked under the car to see if anything else had been done to it. Marcus was thorough in everything he did. Danny Mitchell was getting nervous. He had expected this whole thing to be over by now. Marcus should have called for help or gotten angry or given up. Instead, the man had fixed the problem himself and was acting like nothing had happened. This was not going according to Danny's plan. Marcus got in his car and started the engine. The spare tire would get him home safely. He would need to buy a new tire tomorrow, but that was not a big problem. Marcus had plenty of money saved from his military career. He had lived simply and saved most of his pay for 23 years. As Marcus prepared to leave, he looked directly at Officer Danny Mitchell through the police car windshield. Their eyes met for just a moment. Marcus's expression was calm and neutral. He did not look angry or afraid. He just looked like a man who was paying attention, but something in Marcus's eyes made Danny feel cold inside. Danny had seen that look before in the eyes of combat veterans who had seen too much war. It was the look of a man who had faced real danger and was not afraid of anything anymore. It was the look of someone who was used to being in control. Marcus drove slowly out of the parking lot. He did not speed or make any angry gestures. He simply left like a man who had business to take care of. Danny watched him go and felt a strange mix of relief and worry. Relief that the confrontation was over. Worry that maybe it was just beginning. Betty went back inside the diner and shook her head. She had seen the whole thing from her window. She knew that Officer Mitchell had done something to Marcus's car. Betty had lived in Millbrook her whole life. She knew all the local cops. Some of them were good people who really wanted to help others. But some of them, like Danny Mitchell, were just bullies who liked having power over people. The old man with the dog continued his walk. But he made a mental note to tell his friends about what he had seen. He had a feeling that this story was not over yet. In small towns, word traveled fast. Soon everyone would know that someone had messed with the quiet man who ate breakfast at Betty's diner every Tuesday. Marcus drove home to his small apartment. As he drove, he thought about what had just happened. Someone had deliberately targeted him. They had damaged his property for no good reason. In the civilian world, this was called vandalism. In the military world, it was called an attack. Marcus had spent his career defending his country from people who wanted to hurt innocent Americans. He had risked his life many times to protect people he had never met. Now someone in his own hometown was targeting him simply because he was different. Marcus parked in front of his apartment building. It was a simple 2-story building with 4 units. Marcus lived on the 2nd floor. His apartment was small but clean. He had kept the same neat habits from his military days. Everything had a place, and everything was in its place. Marcus carried the flat tire up to his apartment. He would need to examine it more carefully. He wanted to know exactly what kind of knife had been used. He wanted to know how much force it had taken. These details might be important later. Marcus set the tire in his kitchen and made himself a cup of coffee. He sat at his small table and thought about his options. He could report the vandalism to the police, but the person who had done it was probably a police officer himself. He could ignore it and hope it did not happen again. Or he could investigate and find out who was responsible. Marcus had always believed in justice. In the army, he had fought for justice. He had protected innocent people from those who would hurt them. Just because he was retired did not mean he had stopped believing in doing the right thing. Marcus made a decision. He would find out who had damaged his tire and why. He would gather evidence and build a case. And then he would make sure that justice was done, not revenge, but justice. There was an important difference between the two. Marcus finished his coffee and went to his computer. He had work to do. And Marcus Williams always finished his work. Marcus sat at his computer and opened a secure email account. This was not his regular email that he used for everyday things. This was a special account that only certain people knew about. People who had served with him in Delta Force. People who owed him their lives. The first person Marcus contacted was Sarah Chun. Sarah worked for the FBI now, but she had been a military intelligence officer when Marcus knew her. 3 years ago in Afghanistan, Marcus had pulled Sarah out of a building just before it exploded. She had never forgotten that. Marcus typed a simple message. Need background check on local police officer. Daniel Mitchell, Millbrook Police Department, personal matter. He did not need to explain more. Sarah would understand that Marcus would not ask unless it was important. The second person Marcus contacted was James Rodriguez. James worked for the Department of Homeland Security. 5 years ago, Marcus had saved James and his entire team when their convoy was attacked by terrorists. James had been shot in the leg and could not walk. Marcus had carried him 2 miles through enemy territory to safety. Marcus sent James a similar message. Need information on Millbrook Police Department. Any federal complaints or investigations. Time sensitive. Again, Marcus kept the message short. Old soldiers understood each other. They did not need long explanations. The third person Marcus contacted was Rebecca Thompson. Rebecca was a lawyer now, but she had been a military police officer for 10 years. She specialized in civil rights cases. Marcus had worked with her on several investigations of corruption in military units overseas. Marcus wrote to Rebecca, possible civil rights violation by local police. Need legal advice on evidence gathering and procedures. We'll call you tonight. Rebecca was smart and thorough. She would know exactly what Marcus needed to do to build a proper case. After sending his emails, Marcus examined the flat tire more carefully. He used a magnifying glass to study the cut. The blade had been very sharp, probably a tactical knife like the ones police officers carried. The cut was clean and straight, which meant the person who made it had steady hands and experience with knives. Marcus measured the cut with a ruler. It was exactly 2 inches long and went completely through the tire wall. This was not a random act of vandalism. Someone had deliberately chosen the best place to cut the tire to cause maximum damage. They had known exactly what they were doing. Marcus took more pictures of the tire with different lighting. He photographed the cut from every angle. He also took pictures of the tire's serial numbers and manufacturer information. If this case went to court, the lawyers would need all of this evidence. While Marcus worked, his phone started ringing. Sarah Chun was calling him back already. Marcus answered on the second ring. "Marcus, it's Sarah. I got your message." "What's going on?" Sarah's voice was concerned. She knew that Marcus would not contact her unless something serious had happened. Marcus explained what had happened at the diner. He told Sarah about the deliberate tire damage and his suspicion that a police officer was responsible. Sarah listened without interrupting. This was how they had worked in the military. Give all the facts first, then ask questions. "I can run a background check on this Mitchell guy," Sarah said, "but it will take a few hours to get everything. Criminal history, employment records, any complaints against him? I'll also check if he's ever been investigated by federal agencies." "I appreciate it," Marcus said. "This is not about revenge, Sarah. I just want to know what kind of person I'm dealing with." "I understand," Sarah replied. "Marcus, be careful. Some of these small-town cops think they can do whatever they want. They're not used to people fighting back." After talking to Sarah, Marcus called James Rodriguez. James was at his office in Washington, D.C. He was busy, but he always had time for Marcus Williams. "Marcus, good to hear from you. How's retirement treating you?" James sounded happy, but his tone became serious when Marcus explained the situation. "I can check our databases for any federal complaints against the Millbrook Police Department," James said. "We track patterns of civil rights violations. If this Mitchell guy has been targeting minorities, there might be other victims who filed complaints. That would be very helpful," Marcus said. "I want to know if this was a one-time thing or part of a bigger problem." "Give me until tomorrow morning," James said. "I'll send you everything I can find, and Marcus, if you need backup on this, you know you can call me. I still remember what you did for me in Kandahar." Marcus's third call was to Rebecca Thompson. Rebecca was in her law office in Atlanta, working late as usual. She was glad to hear from Marcus, but she was not surprised by his story. "This happens more often than you might think," Rebecca said. "Small-town police officers who think they're above the law. The good news is that if you handle this right, you can not only get justice for yourself, but help other victims too." Rebecca explained the legal process to Marcus. He would need to file a police report, even though he suspected the police were involved. He would need to document everything and gather witness statements. Most importantly, he would need to get the security camera footage from the diner. "The key is building an airtight case," Rebecca said. "You want evidence that is so clear that no one can argue with it. Then you take it to the FBI and let them handle the federal civil rights charges." Marcus felt better after talking to Rebecca. She had given him a clear plan of action. Marcus liked having a plan. In the military, planning had been the difference between successful missions and disasters. That evening, Marcus walked back to Betty's diner. The dinner crowd was thin, just a few local families and some truck drivers passing through. Betty was working the evening shift herself. She smiled when she saw Marcus come in. "Back for dinner?" Betty asked. "Or did you forget something this morning?" "Actually, I wanted to ask you about this morning," Marcus said quietly. "Did you see what happened to my car?" Betty's face became serious. She looked around to make sure no other customers could hear them. Then she nodded slowly. "I saw Officer Mitchell out there," she said. "I didn't see exactly what he did, but I figured he was up to no good. That boy has been trouble since the day he pinned on that badge." Marcus was glad that Betty was willing to talk. "Would you be willing to tell that to investigators if they asked?" "Absolutely," Betty said firmly. "I've seen Mitchell pick on people before, especially people who aren't from around here. It's not right, and it needs to stop, Betty told Marcus. That the diner had security cameras. The cameras covered the parking lot and would have recorded everything that happened that morning. She offered to show Marcus the footage. They went to Betty's small office behind the kitchen. Betty pulled up the security camera system on her computer. The cameras recorded everything and kept the footage for 30 days before deleting it. Betty found the right timestamp and played the video. Marcus watched as Officer Mitchell got out of his police car and walked over to Marcus's vehicle. The camera clearly showed Mitchell looking around, then kneeling down beside the tire with something in his hand. The video quality was good enough to see Mitchell's face and badge number. "This is perfect evidence," Marcus said. "Would you be willing to give a copy of this to investigators?" "I'll give it to whoever needs it," Betty said. "I've been running this diner for 30 years. I've seen a lot of police officers come and go. Most of them are good people trying to do a hard job, but Mitchell isn't one of them." Marcus thanked Betty and walked home. As he walked, he thought about what he had learned. Officer Daniel Mitchell had deliberately targeted him for no good reason. Mitchell had probably done this to other people before, and now Marcus had evidence to prove it back at his apartment. Marcus found emails waiting for him. Sarah Chun had sent him a preliminary report on Officer Mitchell. The information was disturbing but not surprising. Mitchell had been with the Millbrook Police Department for 5 years. In that time, he had received 14 official complaints from citizens. Most of the complaints were about excessive force or harassment. 7 of the complaints involved minority victims. The police department had investigated each complaint internally and found no wrongdoing, but Marcus knew how internal investigations worked. Police departments often protected bad officers instead of removing them. It was easier to ignore problems than to deal with them. This was why federal agencies sometimes had to step in. James Rodriguez had also sent information. The Department of Homeland Security had received 3 formal complaints about the Millbrook Police Department in the past 2 years. All 3 complaints alleged racial profiling and harassment. 2 of the complaints specifically mentioned Officer Mitchell. Marcus printed out all the information and organized it in a folder. He was building a case file, just like he had done in the military when investigating security breaches or criminal activity. The pattern was clear. Officer Mitchell was a problem that had been ignored for too long. That night, Marcus called Rebecca Thompson again. He told her about the security footage and the background information he had gathered. Rebecca was impressed with how quickly Marcus had put together such a solid case. "You have everything you need to file federal charges," Rebecca said. "This is textbook civil rights violation. Mitchell used his authority as a police officer to target you because of your race." Marcus woke up early the next morning. He had slept well, which surprised him. Most people would have been angry or worried after what had happened, but Marcus felt calm. He had a plan, and he was going to execute it perfectly. This was what he did best. Marcus put on his best suit. It was dark blue and well-tailored. He had bought it for military ceremonies and formal events. The suit made him look professional and serious. Today he wanted people to take him seriously. Marcus gathered all his evidence into a leather briefcase. The security camera footage was on a flash drive. The background reports were printed and organized. The photographs of his tire were in a clear folder. Everything was neat and professional, just like a military briefing. Before leaving his apartment, Marcus looked at himself in the mirror. He straightened his tie and checked his appearance one more time. In a few hours, people in Millbrook would know who Marcus Williams really was. His quiet life in this small town was about to end. Marcus drove to the Millbrook Police Department. It was a small brick building on Main Street, right across from the courthouse. The building looked old but well-maintained. An American flag flew in front of the entrance. The desk sergeant was a woman in her 40s with graying hair and kind eyes. Her name tag said, "Sergeant Johnson." She looked up when Marcus walked in. "Good morning," Sergeant Johnson said. "How can I help you?" "I would like to speak with Chief Hawkins about Officer Daniel Mitchell," Marcus said politely. "It's regarding a criminal matter." Sergeant Johnson's expression changed slightly. Marcus could tell that she had heard complaints about Mitchell. Before, she picked up her phone and called the chief's office. "Chief, there's a gentleman here to see you about Officer Mitchell," she said. After listening for a moment, she nodded. "She see you right away, sir. Her office is down the hall, second door on the right." Chief Patricia Hawkins was a woman in her 50s with short gray hair and intelligent eyes. She had been police chief for 8 years and had worked in law enforcement for 25 years. Her office was clean and organized, with certificates and awards on the walls. Chief Hawkins stood up when Marcus entered. She shook his hand firmly and invited him to sit down. Marcus could tell that she was a professional who took her job seriously. "Sergeant Johnson said you wanted to talk about Officer Mitchell," Chief Hawkins said. "What seems to be the problem?" Marcus opened his briefcase and pulled out the flash drive with the security footage. "Yesterday morning, Officer Mitchell deliberately damaged my vehicle while I was eating breakfast at Betty's Diner. I have video evidence of the incident." Chief Hawkins looked surprised. She had dealt with complaints about Mitchell before, but no one had ever brought her video evidence. She inserted the flash drive into her computer and watched the footage. The video was clear and damning. It showed Officer Mitchell getting out of his patrol car, looking around to make sure no one was watching, then kneeling beside Marcus's car with a knife in his hand. The timestamp showed that the incident occurred while Marcus was inside the diner. Chief Hawkins watched the video twice without saying anything. Her face became more serious with each viewing. Finally, she looked up at Marcus. "This is very troubling," she said. "Officer Mitchell will be suspended immediately pending a full investigation." "I assure you that we take this kind of behavior very seriously," Marcus nodded. "I appreciate that, Chief, but I think you should know that this appears to be part of a larger pattern." He handed her the folder containing the background reports. Chief Hawkins read through the information that Marcus's contacts had provided. Her expression grew darker as she saw the list of complaints against Mitchell. She had known about some of them, but seeing them all together painted a clear picture of problematic behavior. "Where did you get this information?" Chief Hawkins asked. "I have contacts in federal law enforcement," Marcus said simply. "People I've worked with in the past." Chief Hawkins studied Marcus more carefully. There was something about him that she had missed before. The way he sat perfectly straight. The way he spoke with quiet confidence. The way he had gathered evidence like a professional investigator. "Mr. Williams," she said carefully, "what kind of work did you do before you moved to Millbrook?" Marcus reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. Inside was a copy of his military service record. Not the classified parts, but enough to show his rank and length of service. He handed it to Chief Hawkins. Chief Hawkins opened the folder and her eyes widened. She was looking at the service record of a man who had spent 23 years in the United States Army. The last 15 years had been with Special Operations Command. His final rank was Sergeant Major, the highest enlisted rank possible. The record showed deployments to Iraq, Afghanistan, and other locations that were marked as classified. It showed commendations for valor, leadership, and service above and beyond the call of duty. This was not just any veteran. This was someone who had been at the very top of America's military elite. "Your Delta Force," Chief Hawkins said quietly. "It was not a question." "Was," Marcus corrected. "I retired 6 months ago." Chief Hawkins set down the folder and looked at Marcus with new understanding. She was looking at a man who had spent his career hunting terrorists and protecting America's most vital interests. A man who could have killed Officer Mitchell in a dozen different ways, but had instead chosen to seek justice through proper channels. "Mr. Williams," Chief Hawkins said, "I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll be honest with me. When you found your tire had been slashed, what was your first instinct?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "My first instinct was to neutralize the threat," he said honestly. "But my training also taught me to assess situations carefully. I realized that this was not a battlefield. This was a civilian matter that needed to be handled through civilian law enforcement." Chief Hawkins nodded. She could only imagine what might have happened if Marcus had decided to handle this situation the way he might have handled threats overseas. The fact that he was sitting in her office with evidence instead of having taken direct action showed incredible restraint and judgment. "Chief Hawkins," Marcus said, "I want you to understand something. I didn't come here for revenge, I came here for justice. Officer Mitchell targeted me because he thought I was just another outsider who wouldn't fight back. He was wrong about that. But I want to make sure this is handled the right way." Chief Hawkins was beginning to understand the bigger picture. Officer Mitchell had not just vandalized some random citizen's car. He had attacked a decorated war hero, someone who had risked his life countless times to protect American freedom. The irony was staggering and infuriating. "There's something else you should know," Marcus continued. He pulled out another document from his briefcase. "I've already filed a complaint with the FBI's Civil Rights Division. They'll be opening a federal investigation into Officer Mitchell and possibly this entire department." Chief Hawkins felt her stomach drop. A federal investigation was serious business. It could result in the entire police department being placed under federal oversight. It could cost the city millions of dollars in legal fees and settlements. And it could end her career if they found that she had failed to properly supervise her officers. "Mr. Williams," she said carefully, "what would it take for you to consider withdrawing that federal complaint?" Marcus shook his head. "I won't withdraw it, Chief, but I will testify that you cooperated fully with the investigation once you became aware of the situation. Officer Mitchell needs to face consequences for his actions. But I have no interest in destroying good officers or good police departments." Chief Hawkins realized that Marcus was offering her a way out. If she handled this situation properly, she could minimize the damage to her department. If she tried to cover it up or protect Mitchell, the federal investigators would come down on all of them like a hammer. "What do you want me to do?" Chief Hawkins asked. "Arrest Officer Mitchell," Marcus said simply. "Charge him with vandalism, abuse of authority, and civil rights violations. Fire him from the police department. And implement new training and oversight procedures to make sure this doesn't happen again." Chief Hawkins thought about her options. She could try to protect Mitchell and fight the federal investigation, but that would be stupid and ultimately futile. The evidence was overwhelming, and Marcus Williams was not the kind of man who would be intimidated or bought off, or she could do the right thing. She could use this situation to finally get rid of a problem officer and reform her department. It would be painful in the short term, but it would make the department stronger in the long run. "Mr. Williams," Chief Hawkins said, "I want you to know that Officer Mitchell's behavior does not represent the values of this police department. Most of my officers are good people who joined law enforcement to help others. Mitchell is an exception, not the rule." "I believe that," Marcus said. "I've known many good police officers over the years. But good officers have a responsibility to stop bad officers when they see them. That's how you maintain the integrity of the badge." Chief Hawkins picked up her phone and called Sergeant Johnson. "Send Officer Mitchell to my office immediately," she said, "and call Detective Williams and Officer Brown to come in as well. We have an arrest to make." The arrest of Officer Danny Mitchell sent shockwaves through the small town of Millbrook. Word spread quickly that the quiet man who ate breakfast at Betty's Diner every Tuesday was actually a decorated war hero. People who had barely noticed Marcus Williams suddenly wanted to know everything about him. The local newspaper, the Millbrook Gazette, ran the story on its front page. The headline read, "Local police officer arrested for attacking decorated veteran." The article included details about Marcus's military service and Mitchell's history of complaints. By the end of the day, the story had been picked up by television news stations across the state. Marcus tried to maintain his privacy, but it was impossible. Reporters called his apartment and waited outside his building. Neighbors who had never spoken to him before knocked on his door wanting to talk. Marcus politely declined all interview requests and asked people to respect his privacy, but the story was too big to ignore. A Delta Force veteran being targeted by a racist police officer was exactly the kind of story that captured national attention. Within 3 days, major news networks were covering the case. Marcus's quiet retirement had come to an abrupt end. The FBI's civil rights investigation moved quickly. Agent Sarah Chun led the federal team that came to Millbrook. She interviewed Marcus, Chief Hawkins, Betty, and several other witnesses. The evidence was so clear that the investigation was completed in just 2 weeks. Federal prosecutors decided to charge Mitchell with multiple crimes. The most serious charge was deprivation of rights under color of law, which was a federal felony. They also charged him with vandalism and filing false police reports. If convicted on all charges, Mitchell could face up to 10 years in federal prison. The local district attorney also filed state charges against Mitchell. These included criminal mischief, abuse of authority, and harassment. The state and federal cases would proceed simultaneously, ensuring that Mitchell would face consequences no matter what happened in either court. Chief Hawkins kept her promise to cooperate fully with the investigation. She provided all of Mitchell's personnel files and disciplinary records. She also implemented new training programs and oversight procedures to prevent similar incidents in the future. Her cooperation helped minimize the federal scrutiny of the entire police department. 3 months after his arrest, Mitchell's case went to trial in federal court. The government's case was overwhelming. They had the security camera footage showing Mitchell vandalizing Marcus's car. They had testimony from witnesses who saw Mitchell's behavior. And they had records showing Mitchell's pattern of targeting minority citizens. Marcus testified on the second day of the trial. He wore his military dress uniform, which showed all of his medals and ribbons. The courtroom was packed with reporters, local citizens, and other veterans who had come to support him. The prosecutor asked Marcus to describe his military service. Marcus spoke quietly but clearly about his 23 years in the Army. He talked about his deployments to combat zones and his work with Delta Force. He did not go into classified details, but he painted a picture of a man who had dedicated his life to serving his country. Mr. Williams, the prosecutor asked, when you discovered that your tire had been deliberately cut, what was your first thought? Marcus was quiet for a moment. My first thought was that someone had targeted me for attack, he said. In my military experience, deliberate sabotage of vehicles is often a prelude to ambush or kidnapping. The prosecutor continued, did you consider responding with force? Yes, Marcus said honestly. My training is to neutralize threats quickly and decisively, but I also recognize that this was not a combat situation. This was a civilian law enforcement matter that needed to be handled through proper legal channels. The defense attorney tried to argue that Mitchell's actions were just a prank that got out of hand. He suggested that Mitchell had not intended to cause serious harm and that the charges were too severe for what was essentially vandalism. But the prosecution's rebuttal was devastating. They showed that Mitchell had a long history of targeting minority citizens. They proved that he had used his authority as a police officer to intimidate and harass people who could not fight back. This was not a prank. This was a civil rights violation by someone who had sworn to protect all citizens equally. Marcus's testimony was the most powerful moment of the trial. When the defense attorney suggested that Marcus was overreacting to a simple prank, Marcus responded calmly but firmly. I have been shot at by terrorists, Marcus said. I have been in firefights where my friends died trying to protect innocent people. I have seen real violence and real hatred. What Officer Mitchell did was not a prank. It was an attack on me because of the color of my skin. And it was an attack on everything I spent 23 years fighting to protect. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Mitchell showed no emotion as the verdicts were read, but his family members in the courtroom began to cry. His wife and children would have to live with the shame of what he had done. At the sentencing hearing, several of Mitchell's former victims came forward to testify. They were people who had been too afraid to speak up before, but Marcus's courage had inspired them to tell their stories. An elderly black man talked about being pulled over repeatedly for no reason. A Hispanic woman described being humiliated during a traffic stop. A young black college student told about being arrested on false charges that were later dropped. The pattern was clear. Mitchell had been using his badge to terrorize minority citizens for years. The only reason he had been caught was that he had finally picked on someone who had the knowledge and connections to fight back. Marcus also spoke at the sentencing hearing. He asked the judge to consider the impact of Mitchell's actions not just on him personally, but on the community's trust in law enforcement. "Your Honor," Marcus said, "I spent my career fighting enemies of America overseas. I never thought I would have to fight an enemy of America at home. Officer Mitchell's actions were not just an attack on me. They were an attack on the principles of justice and equality that make our country great." Marcus continued, "I ask that you sentence Officer Mitchell to a term that sends a clear message. Law enforcement officers who abuse their authority and target citizens because of their race must face serious consequences. Only then can we begin to rebuild the trust between police and the communities they serve." The federal judge sentenced Mitchell to 3 years in federal prison, followed by 2 years of supervised probation. He was also ordered to pay restitution to Marcus and to perform community service after his release. The judge made it clear that Mitchell's sentence would have been longer, if not for his lack of prior criminal convictions. The state trial resulted in additional convictions and a concurrent sentence of 2 years in state prison. Mitchell would serve his time in federal prison, but the state convictions ensured that he could never work in law enforcement again. Chief Hawkins fired Mitchell immediately after his federal conviction. She also implemented the reforms she had promised, including new training on civil rights and cultural sensitivity. The Millbrook Police Department entered into a consent agreement with the federal government to ensure continued oversight and improvement. The case had a ripple effect throughout the region. Other police departments reviewed their own policies and training programs. Several other officers who had histories of complaints were quietly forced to resign or retire. The message was clear: the days of looking the other way when officers abused their authority were over. Marcus returned to his quiet life as much as possible, but he was no longer anonymous. Veterans organizations invited him to speak at events. Civil rights groups asked him to support their causes. He accepted some invitations but tried to maintain his privacy. 6 months after the trial, Marcus was contacted by the Department of Veterans Affairs. They wanted to offer him a job as a consultant on civil rights issues affecting veterans. Marcus accepted the position, which allowed him to help other veterans who faced discrimination or abuse. Betty's Diner became something of a tourist attraction. People came from all over the state to eat at the place where the famous case had begun. Betty was happy for the business, but she was even happier that justice had been done. She kept a framed newspaper article about the case on the wall behind the counter. Marcus still came to Betty's Diner every Tuesday morning for breakfast. He sat at the same table and ordered the same meal. But now other customers often approached him to say thank you for what he had done. Marcus was always polite, but he reminded people that he had simply done what any citizen should do when faced with injustice. 1 year after Officer Mitchell's arrest, Marcus received a letter from the White House. The president wanted to present him with the Presidential Medal of Freedom for his lifetime of service to his country and his courage in fighting for civil rights at home. Marcus was honored by the recognition, but he used his acceptance speech to talk about the importance of standing up for justice. "I did not serve 23 years in the military to come home and be treated like a second-class citizen," Marcus said at the White House ceremony. "Every American deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their race or background."